evening, wherever it is that you're dialing in from the world, and welcome to today's webinar, Buying, Living, Relocating and Investing in Spain. Thank you all for taking the time to join us. Over the next hour, we'll be covering the key property, financial and practical considerations for anyone thinking about buying in Spain, relocating there or investing in the market. Whether you're already making plans or simply exploring your options, our aim is to give you practical guidance to make your confident decisions, to help you make your confident decisions. And we've brought together specialists covering Spanish property, relocation, visas, tax, wealth, planning, mortgages, and also currency exchange. So you've got access to expert insight across every stage of the journey. I'm going to introduce you very quickly to the panel, and I'm going to get them to expand upon their introductions. We've got Christian, who's a Spanish property expert at Fine & Country in Spain, Kevin, who's the co-founder at Mortgages Direct, Chris McCann, who's a tax and wealth planning expert at Blevins Franks, and Steve Eakins, who is a currency expert at Lumon. And myself, I'm your host for today. My name is Jonathan Hanford. I'm an executive consultant at Fine & Country, and I've been working in the luxury property market for nearly 30 years now. Throughout today's session, you can submit questions using the Q&A function, and we'll answer as many as we possibly can during the live Q&A at the end. And obviously, prior to today's event, we've asked for people to submit their questions in advance. And if we were to answer all of them, we would still be here this time tomorrow. So we're not going to get the chance to do that, unfortunately. So instead, we've cherry-picked the most common ones. And don't worry, because anything that we haven't covered, we're happy to do an individual one-on-one consultation afterwards. So don't worry if any of your questions have been missed. We'll come back to you and we'll talk to you on a one-to-one basis. A couple of housekeeping points before we start. Today's webinar is being recorded because some people will watch it retrospectively, but that does mean that a copy will be sent to everyone who registered. So don't worry about diligently or fastidiously taking notes because you will get the opportunity to be able to watch it back afterwards. And a brief disclaimer, today's discussion is for general information purposes only and does not constitute financial, tax, legal or immigration advice. Everyone's circumstances are different, so we'd always encourage you to seek independent professional advice before making any decisions. So with that, let's get started. A bit more of an expansion upon the introductions. Kevin, give me a minute. Tell us about yourself.
Hi everyone. So as Jonathan mentioned, Kevin Munger, Mortgage Direct, one of the co-founders. The company celebrated its 20th anniversary, 20 years in the sector in Spain earlier this year. We've got 40 advisors on our international team. There are 15 languages spoken at native level. And we're pretty much, I don't want to say, I will say number one in Spain in terms of the size of the business, the recognition we get from the lenders, and just in general, the company and the quality of service that we provide.
Super. Kevin, thank you very much. In no particular order and just next on my screen, I have Steve.
Everybody, thank you for the invite and for me being part of it. My name is Steve. I'm a company called Lumon or Lumon Pay, and we're a very property savvy currency brokerage firm. So we help people move money internationally around wealth and relocation. I've been doing it for over 25 years. There's about 220 of us now across a dozen offices throughout Europe, and we're trading about 25 to 30 million pounds a day. So we do this a great deal. The value and the feedback from our last 1,000 5-star reviews from clients in the last 12 months is around our personal proactive service. And in particular, I'll highlight the demand for proactive currency management with how much the market's moving at the moment, which is what we're probably most in demand for. But thank you for having me. What I'll also say is I'm also the tech lead on here as well. So if you see my eyes going in different directions, please let me assume that I'm clearing emails. This is me answering some questions as they come in.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much for that, Steve. I'll second that as well. I've got notes on 4 different parts of my screen, so if my eyes are going everywhere as well, forgive me. Chris, you're next on my list.
Hello, everybody. Yeah, I'm Chris McCann. I'm a senior partner for Blevins Franks. I've worked with Blevins Franks now for just over 27 years. Blevins Franks last year celebrated our 50th anniversary, and we have specialized and still specialize in advising mainly British expatriates leaving the UK, how to make a smooth move to their country that they're going to live in, typically France, Spain, Portugal, Cyprus, Malta. Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. And dialing in today from Marbella, I think. Is that right?
I am indeed.
Wonderful. Well, look, I'm not going to get too jealous because we've got sunshine here in the UK as well. So,
Well, don't worry, it's a bit muggy today.
that's a rarity. And finally, we have Christian. Christian, can you give us an introduction, please?
Hi, I'm Christian Hara from Fine and Country, Spain. I was born in Spain, actually, in a town called Denia. My dad, Chris Hara, has been selling property here for over 22 years. Family business. We've been part of Fine and Country for over 7 years now. I think across all of our offices in Spain now, I think we've got over 100 years of combined experience. So do very well in helping clients have the smoothest property search possible and purchase.
Wonderful. Well, look, very grateful to all of you for taking time out of your busy diaries so that we could put this webinar together to advise people accordingly. We've got some different segments that we're going to talk through: buying property in Spain, relocating, tax and wealth planning, mortgages, currency, living and investing in Spain, and then if we've got time, some questions. But I'm going to jump straight into buying property. So Christian, we'll start by looking at the Spanish property market and what buyers should know before they start searching, and I emphasize that word, before they start searching. So what does the current market for overseas buyers in Spain look like?
Well, last year in 2025, I think over 700,000 properties were sold across Spain, and nearly 14% of them were to international buyers. So that's that's over 100,000 bought by overseas purchasers. The UK remains the largest of those, followed very closely now by the Netherlands, Belgium, typical Northern Europeans, Germans, French as well. We're seeing Polish buyers now, and also from the US looking to move over for culture and maybe political reasons as well over where they are. But yeah, so it's very buoyant.
So it's quite an eclectic mix of people from different parts of the world there that are all gravitating towards Spain. And you said that the largest market of buyers internationally is from the UK. Which regions or areas are seeing the strongest interest from the UK?
Well, Spain's a vast country, but typically your coastal regions, Costa Blanca, Costa del Sol, the islands, Mallorca, Ibiza, the Canaries as well. I think mainly infrastructure, flight connectivity, climate, lifestyle. Those are the main areas where the UK is still looking to buy.
And what's the attraction? Why are people looking to move to these locations? What's the theme?
Yeah, I think mainly, obviously, the weather is a big factor. Different way of life from colder Northern European countries. Way of life in Spain, excellent healthcare, cuisine, all sorts of lifestyle, outdoor pursuits, tennis, golf, swimming, and everything.
Okay, so it's a lifestyle-driven thing. Okay, interesting. What's the step-by-step process once someone finds a property that they want to buy?
Well, just to explain, once you've agreed terms with a vendor on a property, you would normally first sign a reservation contract, which would entail normally a reservation deposit, normally about 1%, which outlines the terms you've agreed with a vendor. You've then normally got a period of, let's say on average, 2 to 4 weeks to do your due diligence on the property, get a lawyer, make sure all the legal searches are done correctly and everything else. Depending on if you get a mortgage as well, for example, that could be subject to a satisfactory mortgage valuation or satisfactory structural surveyor's report. And then once that period's fulfilled, unless there's a legal reason why you couldn't proceed, that reservation deposit is also fully refundable. So it's a very secure process. But then you would then move on to a 10% private purchase contract, which is legally binding with a defined date for completion at the notary. which on average is around 3 months. But again, can just depend on the terms that you've agreed with a vendor. You can have a longer lean-in period, could be a year, could be a month. It's as quickly as your plans once complete.
Okay, that's interesting. So I had some statistics earlier today from another meeting. So in the UK in 2019, the percentage of exchanges which took more than 6 months between instruction and exchange in 2019 was 36.1%. In 2026, it's 60.8%. So it takes quite a long time in the UK. Coming back to Spain, what would you say is the average from somebody making the decision, seeing a property, offering on it, and then picking up the keys?
I would say 3 months on average from putting an offer in to going to completion would be on average 3 months. I think the due diligence process is very good with the land registry in Spain. Everything also goes through the notary on final completion where they do all the checks and everything else, confirming there's no debts or charges on the property. And once you sign there, you get the keys. I think the main thing in Spain, which is much better than the UK, to be honest, is once someone's committed to a private purchase contract, you know you've got the security both for the buyer and the vendor that the sale is going to happen. If the vendor pulled out, normally on a private purchase contract, they would have to refund the buyer 20%, so double the amount of the 10% that the buyer's paid. And if the buyer pulls out of that, they lose their deposit.
Yeah, so it's interesting you talk about the reservation agreement, and that's a change that's going to be coming in the UK. It's not here yet. You can do it, but it's not mandatory. So it sounds like the Spanish market have got it right, and we need to follow suit. So in terms of costs and fees, what should buyers budget for on top of the purchase price?
Well, it can vary in different regions, but I'd say as general rule of thumb, you would want to factor in around 10 to 13% on top of your property purchase price. The bulk of this, depending on whether you're buying a resale, you would be paying property transfer tax or VAT on a new build. Then you've got your lawyer's fees and your notary fees and the land registry fees. You would want to factor in around 10 to 13% of that. One thing I would mention as well is in comparison, once you do own a property, your council tax is a fraction of what you're normally paid in the UK, so it's relatively a lot cheaper as well.
Okay, fair enough. What would you say is one of the or some of the common mistakes that you see overseas buyers making when coming to Spain and searching for and buying a property?
I think common mistakes, maybe in terms of avoiding mistakes, which is good we're all here today. I think it's about getting your team correct, about engaging with a trusted estate agent who's very knowledgeable, who's here to hold your hand throughout the process, dealing with a good independent lawyer as well. You're looking for a mortgage, you want to deal with a good mortgage broker. I think Steve would also mention as well, currency's a lot an afterthought in many cases, so you want to make sure it's all about preparation. And if you're looking for relocation as well, making sure you've got all your tax affairs in order, because without preparing sometimes can then lead to some future costs as well, which you didn't anticipate. So it's just having everything organised and dealing with the right people.
Yeah, it's interesting. Having worked with Finding Country, and we've got 300 locations worldwide in 6 continents, so you see all of the different patterns. The one common thing that I see is people find a property first and then they assemble their team afterwards. And it's too little too late. They end up making knee-jerk reactions and decisions on things because they're panicking and flapping rather than understanding everything that they need to do. So so if somebody was starting to look today, other than assembling their team, what's the one piece of advice?
I think with any clients we're engaging in, the first thing I would say, to be honest, would be get in touch with us. I mean, normally we would have an initial Zoom meeting or a phone call just to discuss really what someone's ideas are, to discuss the property search further. Timescales don't matter to us, whether you're looking at buying in Spain in 5 years' time or in 3 months. It's just listening to what your plans are, what areas you're potentially looking at buying in, what your lifestyle requirements are. I think the key difference here as well is for Finding Country clients, we're often acting as a property finder for them based on someone's search criteria and wants and needs. We've got access to all the market in Spain, so we'll be putting together a property viewing agenda as well. collaborating with trusted agents as well, making sure the legality is all correct as well. And putting a viewing agenda together, we'll send out a list of hotel and restaurant recommendations as well. And it's just making sure that your property search is as comfortable and smooth as possible.
You see, culturally, that's different for a lot of people in other countries. They tend to work in bubbles with different agents, whereas obviously you can offer that tailored service where obviously you can pick people up from the airport if necessary. But more importantly is the length of time that it takes, because it's such a big decision for people. It's interesting to acknowledge that actually it might be years before they're in the right frame of mind.
Sometimes when someone comes out on the first trip, we're really showing them around the area first and what they would maybe find more relevant to them, different towns and locations and properties afterwards. I think the mistake sometimes can be someone's focusing on the property and then maybe not happy with the local amenities or would rather be in another place. So it's all about viewing the area. I've shown you around. I mean, beforehand, we've been on trips 3 or 4 times before someone's found the property. Of course, you can get lucky and maybe find your dream house on the first trip, but timescales aren't important to us. It's just making sure that you make the right decision ultimately.
Love that. Areas first, property second. That's a great concept. I've spent time with you guys on the ground, and obviously it's one of the first things that you did with me. So jumping across to the actual relocation process, what are the main visa and residency routes for someone relocating to Spain, say for instance from the UK?
Yeah, I mean, we would always put you in touch with a visa specialist to talk in more detail, but the 2 main visas you can get at the moment is a non-lucrative visa. So you can live in Spain and work remotely, whether that's for another company overseas, your own UK company, or also you've got a non-lucrative visa, which is essentially a retirement visa. You just have to prove that you can come over to Spain and live without having to work. So it's just showing proof of funds for that. And also you can relocate if you get offered a job by a Spanish company as well through that matter. But it depends how long you want to spend in Spain. I mean, at the moment, for us from the UK and also the US, at the moment, you can only spend up to 90 days out of any 180 days at a time, which if you're just buying a second home or a holiday home, perhaps isn't a problem. Because but if you want to spend longer periods of time over, of course, it's worth looking into.
Okay, interesting. And how long does the residency process typically take?
I think it can depend on how competent your lawyer is or your visa specialist, but it's a matter of months, not years. I mean, we've had lawyers complete the process in a month, 2 months before, but let's say on average, maybe 2 to 4 months from start to finish.
Okay. And let's say somebody's made the decision, they're definitely going to Spain. What's the practical steps that they should take in the months before they move?
I think the key thing is if someone's making that move is to have everything in order beforehand and of having the visa process submitted so everything's been approved before moving over, obviously.
Okay. And another tangible, is there an age limit or is
there's no age discrimination. So even if you're older in age, there's nothing preventing anyone from coming over to live in Spain. I think the only thing which you do need is health insurance as well, which can obviously vary, but there's no age discrimination.
I'm glad that you didn't quote an age then. There's a few panelists on the call that might have been a bit upset and offended. So, so last question for you. What's the biggest misconception that people have about relocating to Spain, would you say?
I think for any country, people I think always hesitant about buying a property overseas. It's a bit of an unknown, out of your comfort zone. And I think it's just Spain, like any other countries, got very established laws with a notary system and everything else. Got a very secure system. We discussed beforehand that we discussed beforehand about the private purchase contract system and the sales process, and everything has to be overseen by a notary. I think also to mention for estate agents here, we have to be licensed and regulated for a license, so we're all indemnified with insurance. Our office in the Costa del Sol is part of the LPA as well, so which is a regulatory body there, me as the vice president of that. So I think it should be an exciting experience. It can be quite daunting for some people to begin with, but once you connect with the right people, again, like everyone on the panel today, it's a very enjoyable and exciting experience, nothing to be scared of.
Yeah, okay. It's a fabulous insight, and I really appreciate that. Look, for anybody watching, if you've got any further questions that you want to ask, drop them into the chat facility, and then obviously we can hopefully loop back round if we get a bit of time at the end. But there was some great stuff there. Next, we're going to jump across to Chris, if that's okay. We're going to look at tax and wealth planning, because obviously that's an incredibly important element of the moving process. So once the property and visa questions are settled, I'd say tax is usually the next big topic, and quite often it's the one with the most surprises. So what changes financially once somebody becomes a Spanish tax resident?
Look, if somebody starts spending more than 183 days in Spain, then they become a Spanish tax resident. And I think the major change is they become subject to taxes in Spain, and they effectively leave the UK system, not completely in some circumstances, and then enter the Spanish tax system. And what that means is they will have to report information in relation to their assets and income and capital gains to the Spanish tax authorities, and they'll have to pay taxes in relation to their assets, their income and their gains to the Spanish tax authorities. Bearing in mind, very importantly, that's on worldwide assets, not just assets that are sat in Spain or income in Spain.
So, for instance, if you've got a property portfolio in the UK, but you're relocating to Spain, then there's still that liability.
Yeah, Jonathan, you picked the more complicated one there. It is technically liable. You've got to declare it and you've got to report it in Spain, but there is also a system in the UK where they kind of keep hold of you as well. So that is something that if somebody does intend keeping property in the UK, they need to speak to somebody to determine exactly where their liabilities are going to be.
Yeah, okay. This always draws in so many questions. So what should people review before they move? Pensions, investments, property, savings? You know, do you need to look at the spectrum of all of them?
All of the above. You know, as somebody moves from the UK to Spain, for example, everything changes. They need to look at their pensions. They need to sit down really with somebody who understands the situation in both the UK and Spain, and they need to fully understand what they're walking into, and they need to understand their current situation. You know, what changes as they move to Spain, and more importantly, they need to understand, and somebody needs to help them understand how they can improve their position prior to moving, so that they can potentially make changes to their situation that's going to make their position much better from a tax point of view.
And am I right in thinking that sometimes people move and then try and do things retrospectively and it's too late because the cat's out of the bag? So the prior planning is more important.
Yeah, if I had £1 for everybody that had done that, I'd be a rich man. Yeah, typically people tend to turn up and then kind of the thinking that the system isn't going to be very different, or it's going to be the same as the UK, or they're not going to, or they're going to continue to be able to be taxed in the UK, and they're not going to have taken advantage of a lot of things that they could do prior to leaving the UK to get themselves in a much better position when they become resident in Spain.
Sorry to put you on the spot. Just give me one example of a broad one. You don't have to go into too much detail, but give me an example of something that you could do prior to the move that would have a bearing and an impact.
Well, I'll give you an example. Let's imagine that somebody, well, most people that are moving to Spain, they have a house that they've lived in the UK, which is their main residence. Now, most people, some people retain it. Some people want to sell that property. Now, if you come to Spain and you to say, right, well, I'm going to sell my property now. Once you arrive in Spain, you become fully liable to tax, normally in relation to selling that property. Whereas if you sold it prior to leaving the UK, it would likely be subject to principal private residence relief and there wouldn't be any tax.
Okay, I mean, that's quite a significant difference between selling the asset and liquidating it prior to the move.
Yeah, it can amount to a lot of money, and it's a big mistake to make if, as most people, there's a big gain in their main residence because they've owned it for a long time.
Yeah. And also there might be some people that are thinking, well, actually, we don't know if we're going to settle. So do we hold on to it and wait for a couple of years and then we can sell it retrospectively? But they need to know that there are other factors, that might have a bearing upon that decision. So again, speak to a tax and wealth planning expert as early as possible. So here's another question. What are the key considerations around wills and inheritance tax for those with assets in both the UK and Spain?
Well, I think the first thing is to understand that the inheritance tax system in Spain is very different from the inheritance tax system in the UK, and they work effectively in the opposite way. So I think you first of all got to understand both systems. You've got to understand the implications, and you've got to make sure that you plan to avoid them. Now, the situation is complicated a little bit further by the fact that in Spain, the regions of Spain all have their own rules. And so depending on where you end up living, whether it be in Andalusia or Valenciana or Catalonia, the inheritance tax rules are all different. So you've got to make sure that you understand the rules in the region where you're going to live. Now, for example, in Andalusia, it's very attractive at the moment. There are quite large allowances, €1 million per beneficiary, and then over and above that amount, there's a 99% exemption. So inheritance in Andalusia isn't such a problem, but it is a problem in other regions. So you've just got to make sure that you're aware. As regards wills, you are going to be probably subject to legislation in more than one country if you move to Spain, because you've obviously got maybe assets in the UK, you're a British national, you might have bank accounts in the UK, you're going to have assets in Spain. So you're really going to, in most cases, you're going to need more than one will, i.e. you're going to need a UK will and a Spanish will. And I'm not going to go into detail, but you need to make sure that those wills speak to each other and do not cancel each other out. So that is another consideration. This is just one factor in many factors that you just got to make sure you get sorted. It's a very simple thing to do, but if you don't do it correctly, you really can end up in a mess and kind of dying intestate in the UK. So as I say, wills, you need to speak to somebody who understands that. And obviously inheritances, you need to make sure that your assets are properly structured to avoid assets in both countries, inheritances in both countries.
Okay, fascinating. And what are the biggest tax mistakes you see people make when moving to or investing in Spain?
Well, I think I've mentioned, most people kind of turn up in Spain and think that they can choose where they pay tax. I think that's quite a common one. I think, people come here and think, oh, I'm just going to continue to be taxed in the UK. I don't have to necessarily pay taxes in Spain. I think another one is that people believe that the tax system in Spain is not very different from the tax system in the UK. So they don't really have to do a lot of preparation. Obviously, when they get here and they realize it's not, it's normally too late. So again, preparation in advance is very important. As I've mentioned, the big mistake is people turn up thinking that they can keep hold of their principal private residence in the UK and sell it at a later date. And then they find out that they may be subject to tax in Spain on the full gain since they purchased it. And as regards of some other assets, ISAs, they're tax-free in the UK, but they're not tax-free in Spain. So if people are kind of wanting to kind of make sure that their investments are properly structured, they need to think about getting rid of their ISAs and other tax-efficient investments in the UK before they leave, so that they can restructure to have similar benefits in Spanish equivalent.
Okay. And there's a 10-year rule for people being able to cut ties between the UK. How does that work?
Well, that's a recent development since the Labour Party's first budget, and now the Tories were about to introduce the same legislation, and it relates to inheritance tax in the UK. The rule is now that once you've been outside the UK as a resident somewhere else for 10 years, then you effectively cease to be liable for UK inheritance tax. Now, that's fantastic, because if somebody then becomes resident in Spain, lives in Spain for 10 years, they effectively can ensure that their assets pass to their children with 0 UK inheritance tax. However, if that person is resident in Spain for more than 10 years, but has all their assets in the UK, they remain liable for tax in the UK. So the trick here is you've got to get yourself out of the UK for more than 10 years, and then you've got to get all your assets out of the UK. So if you get that, if you crack that, then you can quite efficiently make sure that your children and your grandchildren, whoever's benefiting, receives your estate without any UK inheritance tax. Now, combine that with the very attractive rules in Spain, inherited, for example, in Andalusia, you can make sure that they don't pay any inheritance tax in either country.
Yeah, okay. Or 1% above $1 million.
Or a tiny little amount. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, no, it's, yeah, 1% above. Yeah, effectively, yeah, you're right.
Yeah, crazy. So look, last question. I'd love to ask you more, but we just haven't got time today, unfortunately. If somebody only remembers one piece of advice from today, what should it be?
Speak to somebody who knows about Spain and the UK and how it interrelates with each other, and get a plan together well in advance, so you know what you're doing well in advance, and you do it in a step-by-step process at the right time.
Okay, super. So yeah, okay. Don't go and find a property first. Don't go looking at the portals like everybody else does.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, don't get too excited about one property in particular until you've done your homework.
Yeah, okay. That was brilliant. Mortgages. We're going to move on to Kevin, if that's okay. So many people assume financing a Spanish property from the UK is complicated. Let's find out if that is really the case or not. So my first question, Kevin, what mortgage options are available in Spain for, say, for instance, UK buyers?
Okay, so for UK buyers, the maximum mortgage amount is between 60 and 70%. Loan to value. So it's actually loan to purchase price. People occasionally still call it loan to value, but strictly speaking, it's the amount of mortgage you can get versus the purchase price. Okay. Because in Spain, well, they value what you're going to borrow based on that, the actual purchase price. And if the value comes in lower, it's based on the lower amount. But it's loan to value as people in the UK would think of it. So 60 to 70%. There is actually one lender who very recently came into the market with a 75% mortgage, which is the first time in many, many years that you've been able to get above 70%. The interest rate is higher, but for some people where they want to just borrow the maximum they possibly can, that's quite an attractive product. In terms of interest rates, you can borrow with a fixed rate, with a variable rate, or with a mixed rate. The average interest rate in Spain, so this is all different types of rates, and they're just finding out what is the average, 3% at the moment. So compared to the UK, I think it's around 4.2. I just read that it could be going up to more to 4.5 with the recent changes with the bank interest rates. So that's basically the types of mortgages that are available. What's not available, interest only. So many people in the UK still like an interest only mortgage, especially if they're investing in a property which is not their main residence. That can be quite attractive to people who think, I'm going to have an investment property, or it could be, you can sort of compare that to a second home in Spain. Maybe I'm going to have this second home in Spain, but I'm going to stay in the UK. I'm going to die in the UK. I'm not planning to move over there. So at some point in time, I'll get rid of that property. I'll sell that property, in which case interest only would be quite attractive, but it's not available in Spain. It's never been available, and it's never going to be available, in my opinion. And also buy-to-let mortgages, what we're used to in the UK, they don't exist in Spain. So they're the two main kind of categories that we get asked about most often, and they don't actually exist.
Okay, fascinating. So deposit-wise, obviously from what you spoke about there, the lowest being 25%, but quite common for 30 to 40%. How is affordability assessed?
So affordability, I think some banks in the UK are now adopting the system that they've got more or less throughout Europe. So they use what's called a debt to income ratio. What that means is the lenders are going to look at the household income, the net amount, or more the people that are going to be on the mortgage. So mum and dad on the mortgage, husband and wife, they'll look at their combined net income, and then they're going to work out the debts. So loans, mortgages, if they've got credit card amounts which are not being cleared each month, they'll use a calculation to work out what the monthly amount for that is. They don't tend to include things like private school fees, or in most cases maintenance, but that's not a one size fits all. Depends on the lender and the overall profile. But once they've got the amount of monthly debt, they'll work out what that is as a percentage of the mums and dads net income per month, and that percentage can't be above typically 30 to 35%. There are a couple of lenders that are going to be more generous and go up to around 40%, but that's in a nutshell how they work out the affordability.
Okay, fascinating. So, and this isn't on the questions, but it leads into what you said, which was quite an unusual thing. I've not heard that they don't have the buy to let. So if I'm buying a holiday home and I'm going to live in it for 90 days a year, and the rest of the time I want to let it out in order to be able to get some income, it's not your stereotypical buy-to-let mortgage, but I'm still letting it out. Are there any restrictions from the lenders on that, or would they categorise it as a holiday home?
My advice to clients is don't go into the negotiation with the bank saying that you're going to rent it out, because until you own the thing, and it sounds like we're being dishonest, but that's not the case. I mean, it's more to protect the client, because some people, they buy a property, they think I'm going to rent it out, and once they get into the nitty gritty and find out that they can't do it due to the rental rules and so on, they decide they're not going to. So our advice usually is, look, keep that to yourselves. They're not going to look at the future rental income. They're not going to include that in this debt to income calculation that we've spoken about. So just go to the bank and say, this is going to be my second home. I'm going to use it with my nearest and dearest, and maybe some friends will use it, but we're not going to treat it like a business. And that's the best way to go to a Spanish bank. Spanish banks have a very different kind of way of looking at somebody that comes to them and says, I'm going to rent it out. They treat that then as a type of investment property. They then don't want to lend the maximum loan to value ratio. They get very nervous. You might have read stories about properties in Spain being, squatters in there, or ocupas as we call them here. They are notoriously difficult to get out, and the rates of occupancy by squatters is much higher in Spain. I mean, I would say there's a huge problem with it in the country in general, especially in cities. Barcelona, for example, has a huge problem with ocupas, with these squatters. It's very difficult to get them out. That freaks the banks out when they hear that the foreigners are going to be intending to rent the property out. They're not going to be living in the property. They're going to be managing the property from overseas. It just makes them very nervous. And also with valuations, which are crucial when you're getting a mortgage, you don't want the valuer to go to the property and there's a sitting tenant, for example, or they find out that the property is still being rented and it's only going to be available after the person buys it. This, in general, really makes the banks nervous. So it can throw a spanner in the works in some cases, in the worst examples. So we would really say, there's no such thing as a buy-to-let mortgage where you can come along. In the UK, for example, you can go to a bank and say, I'm going to buy this property. It's going to be a buy-to-let. And the bank would be interested to find out what kind of rent you're going to get for the property, work out what your monthly mortgage is. They say we can even do an interest-only mortgage. This is what I would say is like the buy-to-let mentality for somebody from the UK. So you have to just literally ignore that, forget about it when you're coming to Spain. You want to be able to secure the property, and the best way to do that is to say that you're not going to be renting it out.
Okay, understood. So coming back to the debt to income ratio, do lenders treat rental income or overseas income differently? So, for instance, if you've got income from the UK rather than from Spain, would they look at that differently, or would they just treat it all the same?
Rental income is probably the thing that would be we would highlight to a client most of all. So we do get a lot of clients that come to us. They've got a property portfolio, they're interested in property, and now they want to make the move over to Spain and potentially build something similar. It's very difficult to do that in Spain because of the reasons I've spoken about. There are no buy-to-let mortgages. But in the first purchase, when the bank is assessing that person's profile, they're also going to look at the rental income and they're going to make an assessment. And usually they just apply the same rules that they would do if it was somebody in Spain with a property in Spain that they're renting out, and treat it exactly the same way. So they don't look at it and say, oh, the UK housing market is far more stable. There's not as many rights for people that are renting properties. Well, we know that that's even changing now as well in the UK. So what they would normally do is take the rental income and multiply it by a percentage. So they might say 75%. Why is that? Because they'll make assumptions around, is the property going to be rented out for the whole of the duration of each year? Are there going to be periods where it's unrented? What kind of extra taxes does that person pay because they own that property? And all these types of things. So they apply a discount on that rental income. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, it's 75%. When they're working out the debt to income ratio, they'll take the 75% of the income and then they'll multiply that 75% by the debt to income ratio, their maximum. Let's say it's 35%. So they apply 35% to the 75%, and then they deduct the whole mortgage from that amount. So if the person's got an interest-only mortgage in the UK, a lot of our clients do have them, they will sometimes, in the worst case scenarios, recalculate that interest-only payment as if it's a capital repayment. So they'll get the information on the latest mortgage statement, see what the interest rate is, how long the term is, and recalculate it. So all these things, it's the complete opposite of what you would expect if you're a buy-to-let investor or a buy-to-let landlord, whatever you want to describe yourself as. When you come to Spain with that same kind of mindset, everything you thought you understood from the UK is not applicable.
Okay, fascinating. Last question. What's the biggest misconception people have about getting a mortgage in Spain?
I think the biggest one is simply that they can't get a mortgage. Somebody from the UK, I'm earning in pounds, I come to Spain, there's no way they're going to offer me a mortgage. It's absolutely the opposite. In Spain, I think it's one of the most open countries in terms of the banking systems for getting a mortgage. It makes absolute sense for many of our clients. They want to make this property investment. In most cases, people are making an investment. That's the way they see it, unless they're actually moving over. They want to make that work for them in the best possible way. So you can get a mortgage. The interest rates, as I've explained, are much lower than in the UK at the moment, and that potentially is going to widen even further. The banks are open to lending to you. You can get a very attractive loan to value. I would say that you need to do your preparation very well. As long as you've got a realistic deposit level, you understand how much you're going to need to complete the purchase. Early preparation, and then where a mortgage broker comes in, I think this is the biggest thing we add in terms of value. Matching your application to the bank that's right for you, because not everyone is going to be going to the same bank and be getting approvals from the same bank. Some clients come to us and we say, you're definitely not for Sabadell, you're going to be a CaixaBank or a Santander. This is something where we add the most value.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Kevin. One of the things that people think of last and they really shouldn't do is currency. Steve, how much money do you move a day on average?
Somewhere between 25 to 30 million sterling. I think yesterday was about 32. 32
million. So look, that's obviously a lot of money that people need to think about. And when you do it in the process and when you think about it, can have a profound impact upon how much you'll either save or spend. So many people will just think, well, you just transfer your money through the bank. Is that right?
No. Next question. Yeah, no. It's one of the many misconceptions when people start this process that they'll just go to the bank. Ultimately, if we couldn't save people money, we wouldn't be here. But the other big piece that you're alluding to there is that huge difference. If you're listening to this live or watching over the recording later, you will have fallen in love with a property perhaps. But if you're dealing internationally, there's a huge difference between the price of the property and the cost of the property. So the difference between the point of agreement and the point when you need to transact to complete the purchase. And that price to cost variable is huge and very variable, and it's currency is no longer transactional, John. It's no longer the thing at the end of the to-do list and just finding the cheapest provider. It's proactive currency management to ensure that the property costs the price that you want it to, or in fact becomes perhaps cheaper and you can get a property with a bigger pool. But to give you an example, even in the last 14 days, the pound to euro exchange rate has moved by over 1.5%. 1.5% difference. So that means if you're looking at a property for €1 million, for example, even in the last 7 to 10 days, it's made a difference of a 4-figure sum to your budget. So a sizable amount. So yeah, it's no longer the end of the to-do list. It's something as part of the squad, the team that clients should account for and start discussions with early to ensure that the property they fall in love with is the property they can still afford on their power spreadsheet.
Yeah, that the difference of the actual cost of a property is a complete paradigm shift in terms of your thinking. And for us, it's been the difference of whether we've brokered a sale or not, because it's either become more affordable or the gas bridge, and people have got to think of this in advance. So I guess a question that people who are going to be watching are going to be thinking of is there a cost to open an account or to use this service? How does it work? Everything's too good.
There isn't a cost or a premium to deal with our specialist service here. No, so there's no cost to speak to us, to engage with us, to send funds, to hold funds, to transfer funds out. How we make our money is in essence a small difference between where we buy and where we sell our currency. So it's built into the exchange rate that we offer to a client. In essence, what we're doing here is kind of providing a better rate of exchange than that of the bank. Again, otherwise we wouldn't be here, while letting that personal service and that proactive service to call out and engage with our clients, in essence being their eyes and ears in the market, so they can try and transact at the right time for them. The plain question here is, when was the last time the bank rang anybody? And with the market moving the way it has, and we've recently seen the pound to euro rate reach a 13-month high, with everything that's happening politically and economically at the moment, that does mean from a consumer, from a client's perspective, all of a sudden you can offer more for the property that you want to buy, importantly without spending any more pounds or any more dollars, for example. Your budget goes further by timing that transfer. And we've had many cases, as you've alluded to there, when we've been introduced to clients and they've been able to do exactly that. They've been in a negotiational stage for a property they want to move forward for. The budget can't stretch any further. They have a conversation with us. And even from a transactional perspective, we've been able to get more euros for their pounds or their dollars, enabling them to increase their offer for the property and get a deal agreed without technically spending any more pounds or dollars, because we're giving them more for their money.
Do they need a Spanish bank account? How does it work? Because I've got one.
Good question. Yeah, this is another wide misconception that clients will say, well, I'd love to do something now, but I don't have a destination account. I can't. We're regulated so strictly across the UK, Europe, and indeed over in the US that we can actually buy and hold clients' funds for them. So clients don't need a destination account before they can start managing their currency exposure. To a point that, again, with that recent example of the exchange rate reaching so high, we have, being honest, we've had multiple clients who know they're going to buy it. I am going to be in a place in the sun in Spain in December and Christmas, and what they've actually done is they've bought their currency before they bought their property, because they want to make sure they're protecting that budget, protecting that spreadsheet, and getting more for their money.
Okay, so you talked about volatility, and I remember like years ago you would have like a small change, and it'd be front page news and headlines, whereas now it's more commonplace, and it can happen over a smaller period, a couple of days or even a week. What are your expectations for the markets moving forward? Are you expecting more volatility? Are things going to get more simple and more easy, or what's your crystal ball predictions?
I'll go get it. To your point, to demonstrate this, when I first stepped into this industry nearly 2 decades ago, if the exchange rate moved by 0.5%, it would be big news. It would be all over the news, be on the front of the FT, be huge news. We've seen that level of movement for the last 4 days. It can have a big impact. That's I'm not just saying the currency is a risk, it's equally an opportunity. It allows budgets to go further. So having that early conversation is super important. With regards to volatility, I'm afraid this is the new world. Yes, volatility, I think, will continue. Some people will argue that this is all Trump related and the world moving at pace. And there is an argument to say that perhaps after the midterms, when he loses some control through the houses, it means he can't move as swiftly. But I'll give you an example. You know, he's got his own social media outlet. That's where he puts a lot of his commentary, which drives these markets. And they're now discussing whether or not they put a $100,000 monthly fee to have access to those feeds first. So, yeah, the volatility isn't going anywhere. It's something to be very aware of. It's not a scaremongering tone. It's just something to be educated and be conscious of, because it comes with opportunity and as well as being aware of the risk associated to it.
A Trump tariff on the Truth Network.
Pretty much, you pick the headline, but yeah, in essence, that's being discussed at that level. So volatility isn't going anywhere, no.
Wow, that's crazy. Okay, give me an example of how much it could affect somebody's budget. You know, give me. Obviously, don't quote addresses or anything along those lines for fear of breaching GDPR. But give me the numbers behind a recent example.
We're dealing with a lot of Americans coming into Europe as well at the moment. We dealt and assisted in an American purchase in Europe. And what we did was we were introduced at the time of the offer being accepted and pushed forward. At that point, the exchange rates were moving a lot. Their budget was pretty tight, to be fair. You know, if it went the wrong way for them, it would really cause a challenge. So what we did is we locked the exchange rate in for that client at the time that the offer was accepted. When the completion came round, the week of the completion, we did the maths then, and if they bought their euros then rather than at the exchange, it would have cost them over $120,000 more. So it can make a really sizable impact. What I'd also highlight there is something that a lot of clients aren't aware of is an option, is something called a forward contract. What a forward contract is in essence a buy now, pay later option. So it allows a client to lock in an exchange rate when they choose to, even if they don't have access to all of the capital straight away. The benefits and the applications for this is the rates are great, but I'm pending a property sale or an investment maturing. I want to lock in the exchange rate now. Or for a lot of global clients and mobility, a lot of banks will have a capital control. And that's in essence saying, yes, you can move your million, but because you're not in the country at the moment, you can only do 50,000 a day, for example. So those forward contracts can be a very useful tool. And that example there with the American did exactly that. They had to release equity out of investments they had in the US. They wanted to lock in the exchange rate. They used that forward contract. And even with Kevin and his team super skills, I don't think that level of additional debt could have been raised as quickly as that. So safe to say that that helped make sure that that sale went through for that client.
That is some thank you hamper at the end of that transaction. So obviously to be divided amongst the whole team, not just the currency exchange. Last question: what's the biggest mistake you see people make with their currency planning?
I'll give two, if I may. I'll be cheeky, but I'll be quick. First is they think that they can't do anything because they're not there yet, and they assume that the price will be the price. So back to that point around the difference between price and cost because of the volatility. The second is once they have that educational piece around how much the market can move and equally the opportunity and the risk, you should be surprised how many clients then all of a sudden have a view and will roll the dice and be aware of the upside and optimistic. They'll have a view from someone they know that said something, and more often than not will highlight to them the fact that these movements, it refers to a lot of time spent earning the money, paying tax on the money to save the money, and will end up coming in the morning and having an email from them at 2 a.m, kind of suggesting, I'm not sleeping really, let's have a conversation in the morning. So it's around a risk on and off approach. A lot of people assume they have to do all of it or none of it. Whereas in essence, what we're doing with a lot of clients is mirroring their risk exposure with their capital exposure. So doing multiple transfers so they can get a better average weight trading. A long answer, sorry there, I beg your pardon. But yeah, there's a few assumptions there that people think about.
No, perfect. Textbook. Thank you very much. We're almost at the end. We have got time for maybe a few of the live audience Q&As just to finish up before we do a close and a conclusion and a thank you. So I'm going to pick a couple out if you bear with me. And this is to the whole panel. For someone at the very start of their journey today, they've done nothing. What's the one thing they should do this month? Who wants to take the lead on that? Kevin, you've got your hand up. I'm going to let you take the lead.
Just quickly on the mortgage side, I mean, start looking at your situation. Some people, they come to us on the phone and they can't even tell us what their net income is. I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but that is the situation for some people. So I would say get that information very clear in your head and start putting the documents together. Get the last few P60s or tax returns if you're self-employed, download the bank statements, go through it, think about what I've discussed here. And I would just say, get in touch with one of our brokers. It's a no obligation initial assessment, if you like. You can speak to somebody on the phone, you can do it via email, WhatsApp, whatever, and they'll give you a good idea what you can borrow. You absolutely need to know that in advance because you can be wasting everyone's time. If you're going there, you need a mortgage and you're going to be over stretching yourself. You know, you're never going to have the right deposit. You're not going to qualify for the mortgage that you need. Okay,
super. Kevin, thank you very much. I've got one specifically for, oh, sorry, Chris, you got your hand up.
Yeah, I think I'd say if there's one thing for somebody who's thinking of coming to Spain is stop worrying about tax in Spain. Don't let it worry you. Spain is a relatively high tax country, but it's actually one of the best countries for planning. So if you get your ducks in a row, you can live in Spain and pay relatively little tax. And all I would say is most of my clients do not pay very much tax. So if it's one thing to do now, don't make it something that scares you from moving or considering becoming a resident in Spain.
Okay, brilliant, good advice. And Christian, a specific question for yourself. Any hot spots at the minute for the Spanish market? Is there one particular location that people are gravitating to, or are there some common themes?
To be honest, anyway, I mean, the two main areas, of course, really the Costa Blanca and the Costa del Sol Marbella. I mean, I can say, I think last year, 43% of property purchases were from international buyers in the province of Alicante. But I think Spain, I mean, it's got a resale market going back over 60 years now. It's an international hotspot. It's a very safe place to buy. People buying, as we've mentioned, for lifestyle, different way of life. Obviously taxes to consider and things like that, which Chris can sort out for everyone. But it's just a different move. If you're looking to escape Northern Europe or maybe not very happy with the weather where you are in England or on the corporate treadmill and want a different way of life, we made that move over 22 years ago now, and we're very happy about it.
No, we love the train journeys into the city. You know, that's that's a really attractive proposition. Look, we're coming to the end now, and I definitely don't want to run over. We promised people that we'd give them an action-packed hour, which is what we've done. I want to thank each of the panelists for dedicating your time to this. As I mentioned earlier on, we aren't going to get time to cover all of the questions, and there are some very nuanced, specific ones that people have got, but we are more than happy to do a one-on-one consultation to navigate you through the process, be it buying, relocating, investing, if it's a particular property hotspot that you're looking at, if you're a bit unsure about the process and you feel like you need somebody to hold your hand. Obviously, all of the panelists are here to help as much as they can, and we will be in touch retrospectively. But for now, thank you all for taking the time to join us. Hope you found it useful, and thank you to all of the panelists. So have a wonderful evening, afternoon, or morning, wherever you are in the world. And yeah, might see you at some point in Spain.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.